Howdy folks, we're looking at Edge Magazine issue 44. This being released in April 1997 and discussing the future of interactive entertainment. And yet another not so pretty looking cover, this time showing Dark Earth, I think it is. Well, as you can read by the title, it's a French game and a bit of a cult hit from what I understand. Let's take a look how Edge looks at the French gaming scene. The opening column, though, is about something else. What was it about again? About the price drop of the PlayStation happening just when the Nintendo 64 is released in Europe. So at this time, the PlayStation was £130, while the Nintendo 64 was £250, which is a big difference. So, yeah, and I kind of wonder how much money Sony actually made on the PlayStation brand, considering how many games were copied and how cheap they were selling the PlayStation. But I'm sure they made up for that with the PlayStation 2. Yeah, the contents. A lot of a lot of articles on smaller developers all around the globe. So, a Pentium 2 being shown. Apparently, not that much more powerful than the original Pentium, but having MMX in it, which would help with multimedia. Not that interesting for gaming, as far as I could tell. Let's talk about the Saturn II, which would be the Dreamcast, but some hints about Microsoft helping with that. Apparently, Konami's Cobra arcade board was looking very good, according to Edge, and it even blew away Sega. Well, I don't remember that many games coming out by Konami in the late 90s. So, Racing Jam, Cobra Fighting, I don't know those games. Sega still had a strong presence, though. We also see Samurai Spirit 64. In case you didn't know, the Neo Geo company also had Polygon games, but nobody seemed to like them. Here we see some impressive images of a person, digitalized and perhaps even animated, although I'm not sure. But this is actually a multimedia expo, and didn't seem to be that interesting, according to Edge. Even the multimedia would continue to grow, so this would not be the end of the beginning, or the beginning of the end, or something. This sounds like bad news for Nintendo 64, but that's definitely not the case. It's just being released in Europe with quite a party. Okay, more talk about how the clubbing scene is intertwined with video games. Yeah, whatever. Howard Lincoln riding in a go-kart. And what's Warp Factor again? Oh yeah, the Designers Republic, the person who made the layout to the Wipeout games, they continue their work elsewhere, which is kind of cool if you're a fan of their work. Internet Raiders. This game was never released, unfortunately. It's kind of like Elite, but online. The game would be called Planetary Raiders. I could find some people on the internet who said they played the beta. And, yeah, it's exactly like EVE Online, except probably 5 years earlier released, but never was. That would have been cool, right? So here are two people who worked on the, what do you call it? What's his name? Threepwood. Help me out here. The Monkey Island games, yes. And they're now working on the third game. They didn't have any interesting things to say, I thought. Probably the best part was that they said that they want to design the game, the third game at least, in different chunks, so that if you get stuck in one part, you can go to the other part and see if you could figure out that part. And so there are different places to go from the start to make sure there's always something to do. Here's Ron Miller, who I could find on the web, but his career seemed to stop pretty much with Dark Reign. He worked for Blizzard, and he had a big deal to do with the original Warcraft, Warcraft 2, and even Diablo. Then he decided to leave the company because it had grown too big, and then he worked for Activision, apparently, on Dark Reign, another RTS game. And after that, I'm not sure. So, Interstate 76, looking pretty cool. What's this game? Oh, XCOM Apocalypse, the third game, and the one that did improve upon the second one. Yeah. Let's see, Dark Reign. Another CNC clone. We see Symphony of the Night being shown. Combat game, TFX F-22. Joint Strike Fighter was also a thing at the time. Here's a cool game, Silicon Valley Space Station. Kind of like Mario Odyssey, as you continuously jump from one animal to the other to fix puzzles. And what's this? Some Model 3 game. Shadow Warrior, using the Duke Nukem engine. I don't know what this is, some Armadillo game or something, but Namco. Armadillo Racing, Street Fighter EX. Bushido Blade, I guess. Descent, well, oh yeah, and the Quest 64 alpha images of that. Quite a lamented game. Okay, so there's this Apache helicopter game made by Eidos. Edge is mostly focusing on the interesting graphics again. That's all Edge seems to be interested in. Hexen 2, which used the Quake 1 engine, was quite an improvement on the first two. I think it's the best Hexen game. Pretty cool. Heavy Gear. Was this ever released? I'm not sure. It was made by Activision. So it was released by Activision, so you would expect quite a big deal. There's talk about how the game uses smaller mechs, so because they're smaller, they can move around more nimbly, so it makes the action more quicker paced than you would expect from a mech game. Here's a big one. Oddworld's Abe's Odyssey would not be reviewed by Edge for some reason, but a PlayStation classic. Plays a little bit like Flashback and Prince of Persia. I've never liked such controls, but the puzzles are really good. Really good puzzles where you talk with others and take control of others. Again, like Super Mario Odyssey. So, yeah, pretty good animation. The story is kind of like The Matrix, except instead of leaving the Matrix, you leave the factory. Tobal 2. Part 1 was a bit simple. Part 2 was a little bit more adventure-y. Still not that good. Moto Racer. Electronic Arts releasing a motorcycle game. I get them all confused. I think this one did pretty well. Sky Target. An arcade game now also being released for the Saturn, and most people would say that Afterburner was still better. So not a big hit. Okay, let's check out Callisto, who are working on Dark Earth. Yes, the cover game. And Dark Earth would become a action-adventure game, kind of like Zelda, and didn't sell that very well as far as I know. But people who did play it back in the day, they did enjoy it. It had really good production values, great graphics, and pretty good puzzles too, from what I understand. So we'll be seeing that later in Edge, I hope. Here's a racing game called Power VR. I don't think this one was released. We also see Nightmare Creatures, a horror game, which I think did sell pretty well in Europe, but didn't get that high critical acclaim. Here's Treasure, so Edge's favorite company, and there's talk about their newest game, Mischief Makers, being released for the Nintendo 64, and there's a lot of talk about how easy and hard it was for them to make it for the Nintendo 64, and this fellow Masato Magawa or Yoshi Kikumoto, oh yeah, they're both talking. They say that it's harder to program for the Nintendo 64 than for the Saturn even. but it was worth it. You just have to know what you're doing, and then after that you can continue make more games. There's some talk about the past, how they went from Konami to make their own company, how they like to stay small. And here's a little bit about the past. So Mischief Maker's excellent game for Nintendo 64. Infogrames, later to become Ubisoft, and here they have a V-Rally. Above average rally game at the time. There's No Respect. That's an interesting game. Kind of like Virtual On, as in you have two ships who try to destroy each other. Virtual On was much better though. Let's see. Here's we have a Space Circus, which I think would become like Raw Star or something for Nintendo 64. I believe it wasn't very well acclaimed. As you can see, it's some kind of platforming game. And Outcast, that's a big one. Way before it had its time, used voxel graphics and had a comprehensive world. One of those games that people say should have a sequel or be remade or something, or tweaked at least, because it was a good game, but kind of hard to get into though. You needed a really strong computer at the time. Some talk about Ocean, the British the British company, working together with Infogrames. So, and how well that's going, and that they shall take over the video game market. Oh, there's another contest now for $400,000 to make a game for Enix. I wonder if that'll come to fruition. Okay, so American companies, Boss Game Studios, working on Top Gear Rally. Kind of a nice racing game for the Nintendo 64. And here we see Starbucks, who at the time was still a West Coast thing. Lobotomy, what were they working on again? Let's take a look. Oh yeah, they were the ones who ported the PC shooting games to the Saturn. Here we have Duke Nukem. Or was it Duke Nukem 64? I'm getting confused. Anyhow, they also made Duke Nukem for the Saturn. And also Quake, I think it was. Quake 2 was much better on the PlayStation 1, though. So even though they did a good job on getting Quake on the Saturn, it pales in comparison to Quake 2 for the PlayStation 1. Zombie, working on some kind of tank game. Oh yeah, they made the first Spec Ops game, which was a bit of a cult title at the time, one of the first tactical shooting games. So a lot of little developers here being shown. So if you want to look at the oldest graphics of the Spec Ops series, of course nowadays it's not about tactics, it's about political commentary, at least the last game was. New Media has a pretty interesting article about Sophie's World, the CD interactive version, and the article laments how simple and cartoonesque the Sophie's World description of philosophy is. Something I also found at the time. So this is getting personal, but a lot of my friends loved the book, and I was like, geez, I mean, first of all, you should have already known what's in that book, I'd like to believe, if you're 20 years old. And second of all, there are better sources because Sophie's World is just kind of an out-of-whack story. But okay, if that's the way you add sugar to the medicine, go ahead. The CD-ROM apparently is pretty good. Let's see, Romeo and Juliet interactive CD. 2000 AD, it's like a magazine, right? So you can read that at the time. It's also New Media, of course, the comics. Speaker, security alarm, telephone, so you get cold if somebody's in your home. Really, Edge, come on. What does that have to do with games? And some kind of remote link. Whatever. One of the first games on electronic video games. I like it how they call it electronic game. It's so 80s. Yeah, this is 1997. So, actually, this one was released in 1995, and it's mostly with interviews of people who are already in the business and they're asked how to get into it. Chris Crawford's work was really the first game on video game design, but I think this takes second place. Microsoft history book. Here we see Daft Punk's Homework, one of the best albums made of all time. That would launch their career and would continue to be their best work, if you ask me. Porsche Challenge, the made in the UK. You only get to ride Porsche Boxsters, but otherwise a very good racing game. Edge gives it an 8. It sold pretty well too, surprisingly. FIFA 64, which had kind of weird controls, and Edge gives it a 5. Better off playing International Superstar Soccer 64. Oh yeah, Tenka. This sold actually pretty well for the PlayStation 1, probably because it was one of the first first-person shooters for the PlayStation, released by Psygnosis. Yeah, it was okay. They mentioned it's linear. Manx TT, the kind of like Daytona on motorcycles, gets a 7 out of 10. There's a really good sense of speed. Gives you for the Saturn. Oh yeah, Sentient. That's a very interesting game. Only gets a 6 out of 10. It's released by Psygnosis, and it's a adventure game where most of the time you're spent talking with people in this spaceship. And I think the graphics are look really weird, but from what I understand, this game has a cult following because it was interesting talking with all the people and getting them to do what you want. Even though Edge says eventually you get the idea and it becomes a little bit too simple. Okay, Comanche 3, yet another helicopter game. Gets a 7 out of 10. Looks fantastic, right? Kickoff 97, one of the last Kickoff games, gets a 7. Competing too much with better football games. For the PC though, so if you wanted to play soccer on your PC, might have been your best choice back then. Excalibur 2555 AD for the PlayStation. I guess a 6 out of 10. Most reviewers were actually a bit more negative about this. It's kind of like Resident Evil, and I think that says enough because it wasn't as good or something. Theme Hospital, probably the best game shown this month. It gets an 8 out of 10. It's like Theme Park, but with a hospital. You guessed it. Obviously, your objective is to make money. So keep those patients alive. They're better at paying bills. Again, Peter Molyneux. So many excellent game made in the 90s. Sangoku Musou kind of looks like Soul Blade. It's also for the PlayStation 1, made by Koei. Gets a 6 out of 10. That's all I can tell you about it. F1 also being released for the PC, and it was also released for the Saturn, if I'm correct. Yeah, it gets an 8 out of 10, just like the PlayStation game. A good combination of both sim and arcade racing. Let's continue with Exhumed is released for the PlayStation 1. Another good first-person shooter for the PlayStation 1 being released. Total NBA 97, gets a 9 out of 10. Yeah, it was pretty good. I think Edge gave too high scores. It was good, but not everybody loved it as much as they did. About as good as NBA Live. Ultimate Race doesn't get a grade. It's more like a demo according to them. This was more to showcase the power of the Power VR 3D card for the personal computer. So it's a very good-looking racing game, and that's it. Pod gets a 5 out of 10. Not a very popular racing game. This is the PC version. I think it was also released for the PlayStation, I'm not sure. Master Structure released for the Saturn. Gets a 6 out of 10. It's a game kind of like Gauntlet or Reloaded, and what's much interesting is that you can pretty much blow up everything, including walls. Grid Run gets a 7 out of 10. Oh, for the Saturn now. I don't remember this game. Did he say anything? Some kind of I guess it's like a running game. You collect power-ups against other. I'll zoom into the text so you can read it in case you really want to know. Could be a hidden gem for the Saturn, right? Okay, the gallery. Oddworld. Soul Blade. Almost felt like saying Soul Calibur, but Mitsurugi, what's his name again? Mitsurugi doesn't have his beard yet. What's this? Don't know. Dark Colony. This is not in-game graphics. This is actually just a portrait enhanced with computer graphics. For there's some talk about how he made it. Here's Dark Earth, the cover game. Not in-game graphics either, of course. Okay, let's finish this up. It's about time they change this one, don't you think? The arcade games. Operation Thunder Hurricane. Couldn't find anything about this on the internet. But looks like it was quite a ride. Some kind of shooting game on riding on a helicopter. The House of the Dead. That would become a big one. In arcades at least. I know it was made by Sega. It would probably be released for the... I think it was released for the Dreamcast. You also had the Typing of the Dead, which was funny. Yeah, basically the same idea of every gallery shooter, but with such fantastic graphics. It was quite a thing using the Model 3 board. I still see it quite often in arcades. Retro View, looking at Phoenix, somewhat forgotten game, also released by Taito. The problem was Galaxian had already been released, so the graphics weren't that amazing, but definitely more fun than Space Invaders because there are 4 different levels. And this ship you actually got to blow up piece by piece. That was cool. Atari Classics gets released for the PlayStation. We have Tempest, Missile Command, Breakout, Drop Zone. No, what's it called again? Battle Zone, Centipede, and of course Asteroids. Fantastic games. I wonder how they look with the bad resolution because they probably didn't use vector graphics anymore, so they probably had to reprogram it again. Okay, so what do the letters have to say? This guy has a lot of confidence in the M2, saying how good the 3DO was. Somebody's saying, hey, the games are getting too expensive. You got to do CD storage instead of doing this silly DD thing. One letter saying Edge is biased towards Nintendo 64. The other saying that they are anti-Nintendo 64. Let's see, some talk about 3D cards. Yeah, there's one person saying we need more artificial intelligence in video games, especially when it comes to shooting games. It would be more fun to fight against bots. Well, they would come, even with Quake, if you went online. Yeah, let's see, I believe a computer game seller saying that piracy is a big problem and that Edge shouldn't be promoting it, and Edge says, well, we're not promoting it, we're just saying that it's news, that it's a thing. And a lot of talk about Mario Kart 64 apparently among the Edge editorial, how good it is. Some of them thought it was a silly racing game and just basically too silly to enjoy. And the other half thought, hey, you know, it's just for fun. And the funny thing is that this time they gave the Mario Kart game an 8 out of 10, saying it's, you know, still worth buying. But 5 years later, with Mario Kart Double Dash, I think they would give the game a 6 because they complained about Mario Kart being too random. Yeah, I don't think that's a way a lot of people think about the Mario Kart games. It's the randomness is part of the fun of the game. I don't enjoy playing Mario Kart alone, to be honest, but playing against each other and throwing weapons at each other, that's pretty cool, especially with 4 players. Okay, so Q&A. Have I read this? Actually, I didn't. So, yeah, a lot of technical questions, but it's probably not interesting anyway. Okay, next month, yes, Mission Impossible released for Nintendo 64. This game had a lot of hype because it looked fantastic. It was Ocean's big game. It was a very popular movie, and what also happened was that GoldenEye 007 would become a fantastic game, and people thought that Mission Impossible would also be like it because, you know, they're kind of similar movies. That wasn't the case, though. It wasn't a very good game. So, Firelli on the back. And next time we see each other at Edge Magazine issue 45. See you then.